Here's Brody Brazil.
Okay, so look, we're just days removed from the end of the Sharks 2022-23 season. And I wanted to waste very little time in getting to a season review. I want to capture these thoughts while they're still fresh. And so we can go into the summer, into the draft lottery and the draft and free agent moves and really understand what we just witnessed, kind of put all of this into perspective. As typical, I'm doing this in presentation format. I've organized some big picture thoughts. I'll kind of sift through them one by one. So topic by topic, here we go, a look at the season in review. One trend and theme that comes to us from Sharks Stats on Twitter, that's Darren Stevens, who works on our broadcasts. He always has the greatest way of analyzing a game or a situation or a sequence, but here is his amazing stat of the season. 33 Sharks losses came in games where the team had a third period lead or they were tied in the final period of regulation, which, by the way, sets a new NHL record. Over and over, we saw a Sharks team that would be tied at 1 after 1, or up by a goal after 2, or close in a game, whatever it would be, in the third period, right there to start the final frame of hockey. And then one thing would lead to the next, and maybe they didn't lose by a bunch, but the game would always slip away in the third period. And that leads you to maybe two conclusions or two things to think about. Number one is the fact that you have to be content with playing difficult teams for 45 minutes of 60, or being in a game that maybe you weren't supposed to, or loitering in a game, maybe not building on leads, but just being right there after most of the night was complete. But obviously the flip side is close but no cigar, which, by the way, where did that saying ever come from? Close but no cigar. But it did apply to so many Sharks games this season. And the prior record, by the way, was set by the, I think, 2005-2006 St. Louis Blues. When you think about that being an NHL record, to have that amount of leads or that amount of tied games that you ultimately lost 33 times in a season, and just to think about that being a new NHL record, it's a frustrating stat, right? You think about what a few different results would have done for a team over the long term. Now, look, here we are at the end of the season, and most fans wanted them to finish closer to the bottom of the standings to capitalize on a huge draft year and a better odds at the lottery pick. I totally understand that, so I'm not diminishing it. I'm saying reverse yourself back to October, November, December, when we were still trying to figure out what would this season be about, because it was start to finish. This team would be in games for 40-something minutes, and the final 15, almost up to 20, were a definite challenge to close things out. So if we're looking at trends and themes, that might be the most telling stat of the season. Here's another set of numbers which absolutely jumps out. The Sharks' home record, 8, 22, and 11. 8 wins, 22 losses, and 11 overtime losses. Let me actually begin with the 11 overtime losses before we get into the 8, which, by the way, ties a new franchise low, or ties an existing franchise low, which was set in the final year of the Cow Palace season, 92-93. They were there for 2 years before moving down to the tank. But in that final year at the Cow Palace, only 8 home wins. They had more home wins in their first year of existence at the Cow Palace than they did this past season at SAP Center. In fact, their condensed season of 2021, 56 games, they had more home wins in that season than they did in this full season of 22-23. So, but let's go back to those 11 overtime losses. Again, that paints the picture of what I previously said. So many games that they were close or in or had a lead or tied, or they were a competitive team that night and they just could not seal the deal. They could not score last 11 times. Didn't win a shootout, lost 3-on-3, but a lot of overtime losses at the tank, 11 in total. So now let's address only the 8 wins at the tank. And there's a multitude of factors here to think about. Like, number one, try explaining this. I don't know that you can. To be a better road team than a home team, it shows that you are capable of being better than winning only 8 of half your games, like home versus road. So like they're better than this, and they could have gotten at least to double digits, but they didn't. So an explanation for it, I don't know. I really don't. But here's another factor. Not creating a home ice advantage, not being able to come home off a road trip and say, all right, we know we're steady here. We know we can fix our game here. You typically get more practice days at home. You get better rest at home. You get your own food at home. Some people would make the argument that for select teams and personnel, they might do better on the road because less distractions, less life things to take care of. You're traveling. It's just you, a hotel room, a bus, an airplane, and the work at hand. A business trip. We've all been there before. Maybe you can focus a little bit more on work when you're doing a business trip. But to have this much of a contrast, home and road, and to have, one of the worst home seasons ever with only 8 wins, it does not make a lot of sense. I would also say, and to be brutally honest, as we look at a team that's trying to rebuild, restructure, gain some momentum, you have to play well in front of your home crowd. From a business perspective, you have to win people over. You have to give them the experience, not just for yourself and momentum for a season. And we talk about getting right in a year. You need to actually perform in front of the home crowd firsthand so that they'll also watch your road games and they'll want to come back next time. And we all know what the tank is capable of and what it had been for so many decades. Well, this year, obviously, it didn't see that same fortune. It didn't see that same home ice advantage and electric atmosphere. It hasn't. But I'm saying that a winning home record will help boost your team in terms of excitement, conversation, attendance, fandom, all that stuff. You can help yourself by winning at home as much as obviously you want to improve and regenerate as a team. So definitely something to think about with the 8-win home record. Okay, team-wise, complete struggle. We obviously recognize that. But Erik Karlsson had one of the best individual efforts in Sharks franchise history, and especially as a defenseman. If we're just looking at points, obviously he doesn't top the franchise list, but as a defenseman, he absolutely does. A historic effort to get to 101 points. And I think what is noteworthy is we've already established what a rough season it was for the team, finishing with the fourth worst record in the NHL. It's even harder to have this type of season. If he were on a team that scored a ton of points on a nightly basis and was a President's Trophy team and was in the playoffs and had multiple 40-goal scorers, and he was just, kind of coattailing on all of their goal scoring, then fine. You'd say, well, Karlsson was healthy and he was fortunate, which, by the way, I didn't list healthy on here, but for him to play all 82 games for the first time in a long time, that was also a big deal. That's why he was put in this 100-point conversation. And we were projecting this from about Christmas time. He's on pace for 100. Can he get there? It was so cool that he did. But being on a rough team in a rough season and getting to 100, I'm here to say that it is so much harder than being even on a mediocre team, let alone a really good team, to have a 100-point campaign. So it shouldn't be this way, but let's be honest, it is this way, that when we're talking Norris Trophy, your defensive efforts should maybe even take priority, but we're going to look at points for who wins the Norris, which player was able to help their team and be the best player at their position defensively in the NHL. Erik Karlsson has to be the favorite to win his 3rd Norris Trophy, and he hasn't won one in a while. Has it been 8 years now? Are we at 7 or 8 years since he last won? And so in my opinion, doing what he did and how he did it, he's got to be the favorite. 25 goals and the 76 helpers getting him to 101 points. But when you look at the breakdown of 101 points, 74 came at even strength. And so there's 2 sell jobs I want to make here about the Norris. He wasn't also reliant on just getting all his points in the power play. I mean, even if it was 50-50, you might say, well, okay, he was pretty good at even strength and for most of hockey games, but he took advantage of a really good Sharks power play. That's not the case. 3/4 of his points essentially were at even strength. So then there's also this. Some would look at his defensive play and say, well, okay, maybe the dash 26, the minus 26 rating from this season, maybe that could go against him in the Norris race. But let me also point out that he was on the ice this year for 18 empty net goals, which counts against that plus minus. That crazy. Power play goals don't count for it, but empty net goals count against it. Minus 26 this season. So take away 18 from that minus 26, and it paints a lot different picture. Again, what a contrast to the overall rough season for the team to have one of the best individual performances we've ever seen by a Shark is interesting. It's an interesting storyline. Okay, let's get to the late rut of this Shark season, and you can really draw a line in the schedule from Valentine's Day on. From the 14th of February, they played the Penguins that night. I won't forget because I spent my Valentine's Day at the tank with Curtis Brown watching Sidney Crosby and the Penguins beat the Sharks. I'd say it doesn't get any better than that, but it does get better than that. After Valentine's Day, do I have a wah-wah effect? Do I have a feel sorry effect here? Oh, yeah. I'm sure you feel really sorry for me. Okay. Let's regenerate here. From Valentine's Day on, the Sharks went 5-18-5. This is when things at least unraveled from a results standpoint. They lost 9 in a row during one stretch. They also lost 6 in a row to finish their season. Now, they also went on this span of winning 3 in a row and getting points in 4 straight games, which a lot of people at the very end were kind of confused. Like, where are we going here? You were this close to being last in the standings and securing yourself like a top 3 draft pick and the best odds at number 1 overall, and they didn't do it because they won those 3 straight games and points in 4 straight. But to say that they didn't struggle down the stretch and all of this put them in a spot to have the 4th worst record in the league. And it was this late rut that, firmly put them in the conversation of being one of the bottom 4 teams. And by the way, it's basically those 4 teams: Chicago, Columbus, Anaheim, and San Jose. Arizona was in that conversation. They got out of it. They picked up some points at the end. And the next closest team, I think, ahead of the Sharks is at Montreal at 68 points. So 8 points away from the Sharks, if I'm correct off memory here. So there's a big gap between the bottom 4 teams and everybody else. But this is what put the Sharks in that situation. To be clear, they were a struggling team. They were near the bottom of the Pacific Division standings most of the season. It really wasn't until the very end that it got ugly, or that opportunity knocked with a high draft pick until the very end. So again, credit this to maybe trading away players, a mentality of we're moving on, the Timo Meyers, even the Mikey Eyssimont who you acquire and then move back out to Tampa. The mentality might have put them in a situation where they started losing a lot more games, but definitely take note of the late rut that put the Sharks where they ultimately finished. Here's another theme of this past season: really limited chances and opportunities and call-ups for San Jose Barracuda players. Now, it's the reason that 10 years ago, I think it was 8 to 10 years ago, the Sharks moved their AHL team from Worcester, Massachusetts out to California so that they could bring players up, send them down. They could have a really close eye on their top minor league affiliate. But they did not use that bridge very often this season. Really until the very end, and due to some injuries. You see a CJ Cease here and there, a Cechek. Obviously, Eklund and Thomas Bordeleau got their chances late in the season, but for the most part, you could tell there was a deliberate reluctance by general manager Mike Grier to stay or to not bring up players from the Barracuda, to stay the course. There was the best way to put it here is there was an aim to stay the course all season. Sometimes you had no other choice but to bring somebody up. But for the most part, you could see that was an objective, is to keep the Barracuda players on the Barracuda. And it was a statement. I think, without speaking for anybody, I think the statement is, we're still rebuilding. We want to make sure when we call you up that there's no question we're making the right decision. I firmly believe it had been one of the Sharks' experiments of recent years to bring up players maybe on the cusp of being ready, maybe even a little bit before they were ready to be up. And all of a sudden you come up to the NHL, you play 15, 20 games, you're on a different line, serving a different role than you've ever been before, and you struggle and you just can't perform like you want to or you're supposed to. And it goes against you in the long run. So I think kind of a safety net of my career in the new front office is to make the statement of keeping Barracuda players where they were unless absolutely necessary, or like in the case of Eklund, where you could play less than 9 games or fewer than 10 games, and it wouldn't count against future contractual status. Kind of a culture shift here, right? Of instead of bringing players up as soon as they were ready, is to say, hey, we're going to ride with the veteran Sharks team that we have, and we're thinking more about the future than we are the present. We'll sacrifice what we all want. And a lot of times we had the chat, in January and February. When and will we see William Eklund? When and will we see Thomas Bordeleau or anybody else? And it turns out we did. We didn't know when that would come, but the opportunities were few and far between, and yeah, likely on purpose. And then the last thing here to mention about the Barracuda is the fact that unfortunately they did not qualify for the playoffs. And I know their head coach, John McCarthy, was very much looking forward to not only the opportunity of getting his team there, but also getting that young, important group of players in a meaningful playoff series. That grows opportunity to have a chance at a professional hockey playoff series for that group. It would have been a big deal. Would have been something nice to go into the summer with, no matter how they finished, just to get to a playoff series and have that under their belt. Ultimately, they did not qualify, unfortunately. I also think goaltending-wise for the Sharks this year, we didn't get really many answers. James Reimer's contract is complete now at the end of this season, an .890 save percentage at .348 goals against. And actually, in the long term, we talked about how Reimer was more consistent and, numerically better. I mean, when it's all said and done, not by a ton. I mean, both goalies' save percentages are below 900, and their goals against are well above 3. In fact, closer to 3.5 and 4. So I think the point here is that there's no certainties of what happens next in the crease for San Jose. Again, contractually, Reimer is done. Kaapo Kähkönen has one more season under contract. But I don't know what their next move is. I don't know what happens beyond that. Certainly, I think there's going to be some movement at the goaltending position, whether it's internally or externally. But I believe the hope was this past season to have Reimer there to launch the boat, but to have Kähkönen at some point take the reins, be the guy, be your number one, and by the end of the season have enough momentum for the future. But I just don't think we got that answer from either goalie, to be quite honest with you. And so it leaves a lot of questions for the future moving forward. What will San Jose do goalie-wise? I also think as we start to wrap up this video, you need to look back and understand there was a lot accomplished within the past year. I know we're looking at the season in review, but if you go in reverse from April of 22 to April of 2023, I mean, it was only a year and change when Doug Wilson and the Sharks parted ways. That was only about a year ago. And since then, you had a dramatic shift in the front office. And you had, in fact, not a lot of changes made immediately, but then eventually a new coaching staff, a new GM, a new hockey operations staff. Before the season started back in July, the Sharks traded Brent Burns to Carolina, arguably their most impactful player, played the most minutes by far in recent years. Timo Meier traded this season before the deadline to New Jersey. And all of these moves and all of the little things and big things accumulating a lot of draft picks for the Sharks. In fact, here in 2023, they'll have 2 first-round picks, a second-rounder, 2 third-rounders, 2 fourth-rounders, 2 fifth-rounders, and several more even beyond that. So stockpiling draft picks for this year and beyond. You know, sometimes we get caught up in the minutia and all the details and wins and losses, and they're important. But if you step back and look at the year as a whole, in addition to the season that just took place, like, and this is not all the sexy work. This is not all of the the finish work. Like, this is the heavy lifting. This is the trench digging. This is the grinded out type stuff that you have to do to get back to the pretty stuff. I don't think in reverse that it was Mike Greer's ideal thing to come in and say, well, I get to trade Brent Burns now. No, I don't think you want to do that. I think with the salary cap situation and trying to restructure just financially for the future and opportunities, you have to do that. You have to basically make a decision on Timo Meier. If you can't retain him, you got to get something for him. And they did. So not to mention all the players that the Sharks acquired for their pipeline and beyond, but a lot of draft picks too. So again, sometimes the 30,000-foot view is equally important here. A lot of change has happened. Is there still room and need for more? Yeah, probably, but a lot has happened since about a year ago. So with that said, I'm sorry, I just got all the new sound effects here on the Roadcaster, so I gotta go with all these now. I don't know what this one. Does anybody recognize this one? I know you recognize this. There you go. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that I can see you next time. I'd really appreciate it.